You lead your team. Let's talk about it. The Lead Your Firm podcast. Lessons in leadership from advisors who live it every day. Hosted by Darren Blonsky, Managing Principal at Fermata Advisors, a registered investment advisor. Contents are for educational purposes only. Nothing herein amounts to investment advice or an offer to buy or sell securities. The Lead Your Firm podcast starts now.
Welcome back to the Lead Your Firm podcast. I'm Darren Blonsky, your host. Really excited today. We've got Coach Joe Lucas with us here on the podcast. Kind of a unique individual to interview because most of the time we interview advisors that are out there working in the business as advisors, as leaders in their organizations. And Joe comes to us as one of the, premier coaches is the best way to say it in the industry, and gets to see just a really significant swath of different leaders, advisors, and how they're doing what they're doing. Now, in full disclosure, Joe's been a coach to me. He's been an incredible help in my practice and helping grow my business. And tons of respect for you, Joe, and thanks for joining us today.
Darren, thank you for having me, and I'm really, really looking forward to digging into this conversation today.
Great. So now, Joe, you've been involved all along in helping with the book Clarity we've got published on the website and talking about leadership. So you're very familiar with what we're doing and why we're doing it, what our mission is here. Let's dive back into you and dive back into your first moment in leadership. If you have to crawl back into the cobwebs of the brain, and when was it your first moment you're like, wow, I think I am a leader. I think I am leading, or had an experience like that?
You know, I think there's two times that come to mind. One, many, many moons ago, I was probably 17 years old. And at the time, I grew up in the bar restaurant business, sort of like your neighborhood Cheers kind of place, if you can imagine that. And my grandfather started the place. My father took it over, and I was the heir apparent. And my father had a health crisis, and he had to be hospitalized for about 30 days. And while growing up in it, all of a sudden now we had bartenders, we had servers, we had staff and stuff like that. Here I'm 17, I'm still in high school. And everybody's leaning on me to keep this thing going, to keep the business going. And, I wouldn't call it so much, I'd probably call it crisis leadership more than I would call it just pure leadership, because I think there's two kinds of leadership. I think there's being proactive and setting a course and building a culture and stuff like that. Then there's also, how do you lead through crisis? And I think it's a wholly different animal. So I think the first one would be when I was 17 years old and I had to take the reins of a business and not really knowing what the heck I was doing, but being a very quick study. I've always had a belief that, you know what, there's always a way if you're committed. I kind of adopted that from Tony Robbins. And so I think a lot of times we undersell our capabilities because we don't give ourselves the opportunity to go out and try something. And it's like, the terrible analogy I'll give is most people don't know that they know how to swim until they're thrown in the ocean, and you got to figure it out, right? So same thing here. I think that's the first time I would say really kind of came to mind. Nothing to do with our game, of course, but I think I was early studying that. And probably the second time was probably about 10 years ago when we had one of our groups in one of my mastermind groups. And we were just at an impasse in terms of a group where, we could have killed the whole thing, or we could have reframed it. And the easy button for me would have been to kill it and just build a new one. But a lot of those people, some of those who you also know today, were in that room. And so I decided, sometimes leadership is not the easy button, but the right button. And so I decided to reset it, reframe it, raise the standards of it. And I did something which even to this day, really, I still remember like yesterday. I told everybody that you had to opt back in, and here are the new standards. And I said, we're not going to do peer pressure. So you all have my cell phone number. Text me either I'm in or I'm out. Just one word, in or out. And I think we had 18 people in the room. I think 16 were in. And the two that didn't stay, they self-selected, which is great. All right. Now, reality is everybody could have given me the big old middle finger, right?
Right.
And away you go. And so I think sometimes leadership is about taking risk. and just being and understanding the worst possible consequence, right? So I think this is where, and this is not negative thinking, by the way. I think this is how you evaluate. Is I think what most leaders do is they either go one side or the other. Oh, this will be great, it's going to work, and then wow, the landmine blows them up, right? Or they think it doesn't work, it'll never work, and why try? And I think the middle is the sweet spot. I think you always want to evaluate every situation from a, hey, if this works, here's what that means, right? So be in the gain, in essence. And if it doesn't work, what's my worst case scenario? Like for me, the worst case scenario was, okay, so I don't have a group. I'll take a short-term economic hit. I'm going to build a new group anyway. And so no harm, no foul, right? And I think that's a real key question all leaders need to ask themselves is, hey, what is the worst possible scenario here? And can I survive it? Doesn't mean you're going to enjoy it or it's going to be pleasant, but can I survive it? And if the answer is yes, I can survive it, then chances are I'm probably going to, if I was working with you, I'd probably encourage you to go do it.
Right. So Joe, you mentioned you said there's kind of two different environments in which leaders kind of show up. One is that environment they're kind of thrust into, and then the everyday leader per se. Define those, pull those apart a little bit for us.
Sure. So I think, the first one is adversity driven, right? So in our world, let's just go back to a pandemic a couple of years ago. Let's go back to 2008, 2009. Let's go back to 2000. I mean, we can always go back to look at black swan events. And let's just say a lot of times these are market driven, right? So so your team is watching you, whether they admit it or not, they're going to get their vibe from you. So for example, in 08, 09, which is probably a great example, because that was really more specific to our game, not the world in general. I think advisors really fell into two camps. Okay, let's get proactive. Let's serve the greater good. Let's over communicate. Let's get out there. Let's be proactive. And then the other camp was, hold on, let's hope. And let's hope we have a business come Monday. And I think it was that stark. I don't think there's a middle ground on that. So I think most leaders need to do is to decide in advance how you're going to handle a crisis. Now, this is not negative thinking, right? But for example, not that we wish this on anybody, but if a bunch of people come in with blue windbreakers and say FBI or SEC, what's the game plan there, right? Or your top 5 clients leave you, or your number 2 COO walks out the door for a better gig. Like you got to, and again, it's not a negative thing. It's about preparation. Athletes prepare for injury. They prepare to get hit. They prepare to, to compete. It's not negative, just part of the game, right? So I think you always want to be, I always talk about having a plan B. I think every great leader has to have a plan B, whether I don't like my custodian anymore, or I don't like my affiliations, or, a certain member of my team is not elevating the way I need to elevate them. What's my game plan, right? And when you have that game plan, what you're really doing as a leader is creating certainty. And then when you're creating certainty, then it's easy to lead and be congruent in your communication, because you're already congruent internally, because you already know what the potential outcomes would be. It's when a leader gets into I don't know, that's a real dangerous place for the organization. Well, I don't know. They're looking to you to know, even if it's a guesstimate. All right. So that's leadership through adversity. And then let's talk about being proactive, right? In that regard. So it shocks me. There's a couple things I do when I potentially take on a new client, right? I always want to ask some questions, and I think you remember this too. Darren, it shocks me still today. Advisors who run multi-7-figure businesses, and I say, tell me where we want to be in 10 years from now, and it's vague. What's your culture about? It's vague, right? I mean, it just shocks me, which tells me two things. Number one, get your game figured out. Man, you could be a 9-10 million 9-figure firm, with some energy and effort. And the second thing it tells me is that this is a very sustainable business. Because the difference between competency and excellence is stark. You can be a competent advisor, a competent business owner, and make 7 figures. You become excellent, you make 8 figures. It's really that much of a gap. So being proactive is about vision, culture, standards. It's about coaching. I think there's a pervasive thought that, I pay my people really good, they should just know what to do. Like I shouldn't have to do that. And so they abdicate to me one of the cornerstones of leadership, which is coaching your direct reports, making them the best versions of themselves. So that way your business can be the best version of itself. And I think a lot of leaders miss that because they think if I pay them well, they should figure it out. They might, but more will not than will. And I think that's a real big challenge.
Super insightful. You made one comment I want to drop back on. He says, super dangerous when the leader says, I don't know. And I want to pull that apart a little bit because I think there's this aspect of great leaders that also has a level of humility and honesty. And the truth of the matter is, if you're a financial advisor, you're in the game of not knowing because who knows what the market's going to do, right? And what our clients want from us often is that communication of certainty. How does one communicate certainty when the truth is they don't know as a leader? How would you coach someone to understand that concept?
The key differential is timelines.
Say it again.
So
the key differential is what?
It's timelines. Timelines you look, right? So like you and I can sit here today, and this is more your game than mine, but you and I can sit here today say, hey, we're not sure where the market's going to be in the next 30 days, but we're pretty sure where it's going to be in the next 5-10 years, right? Because again, timelines, right? So there's a couple of ways to create certainty. You can create certainty by belief. Hey, I just believe this is going to be the way it is. And if you're really congruent and passionate and you get people to buy into your belief, you're there. And there's nothing wrong with that. The second way is by frame. How do I want to look at it? Am I going to look at it as a 24-hour chunk, a 7-day chunk, a 30-day chunk, right? And so on. And I can remember November of 2008, where I was getting 911 to death on my cell phone. This is the day Congress was deciding whether or not they're going to fund this thing or not, right? And I remember so much uncertainty. I mean, guys are calling me up saying, we're going to be in business. We have a market on Monday. And I remember all that. And I said, look, I don't know about Monday, but I know they'll be want to hear in 5 years, right? Mm-hmm. We'll see what they do, right? And it was very stark, Darren, because the advisors who did not internalize what was going on. I think as an advisor / leader, you had two choices how to deal with this. Either how's this going to affect me, or how's it going to affect my clients and my team? And the advisors who worried about themselves were the ones that bunkered up, got glued to the news, were looking at their accounts, trying to figure out, what they were going to do, where the proactive leaders were like, is my team okay? Because they're on the firing line, right? Or they're worried about their jobs. They're worried about their family. Hey, we're going to have a game come Monday. And then obviously the clients, right? So I think leadership is about being internal when you need to be internal, and then being external when you need to be external. Key differential. Being internal is when you go on your own walk and talk. You go on sabbatical. You just do some deep thinking. Being internal. External is when you're checking with everybody else. Right? How's everybody else doing? Right? So if you think about it, leadership is a balance, right, between the two. And it's not a 50-50 balance. I think it kind of goes by what situation. You and I talked about sabbaticals, deep thinking, not worrying about bringing the iPad or a phone, just thinking. Well, that's going to skew us all the way over here, right? Internally, right? Mm-hmm. But then you get back in the game and you got stuff going on, business, stuff like that. Well, now we're going to skew way over here. So it's not about finding balance in a day or even in a week per se. It's understanding what mode you've got to be in to be effective. Right? Yeah. Most advisors and leaders will always weigh to the external side because that's quite frankly, that's the easy. What leaders in this game do not do enough, they don't spend enough time just thinking. Just taking a walk in the woods and wherever shows up, shows up. It's a real skill set that needs to be developed that I think a lot of leaders don't have.
It's funny. I had a conversation with my COO yesterday, Jackie, and we were talking about this very concept. And I just said, hey, I'm going to be spending a lot more time this upcoming year thinking and less doing. And she immediately says, oh no, Chris and I are in trouble. And Chris is my partner, and Darren's going to have all these ideas. And I said, no. I think part of the challenge and part of the transition we're making as an organization is less half-baked ideas and more fully baked ideas. So we're transitioning to that. And I think you bring up that really important point of the leaders need to take time to think. And I've learned that in I think leaders get to a certain level because they're just in motion. And then they get to that level. And Dan Sullivan has this really good book called 10X or what is it? 10X. What is it? I have it right here. It's
10X is easier than 2X.
Easier than 2X. Exactly. And I think leaders get this like 2X mentality, just more of what I'm doing is going to help me grow.
Yes.
But that's not true, right? If you really want to 10X yourself, you've got to do things radically different. And I think you're bringing up those exact points, Joe, and that is just the idea that we need to pause, we need to think, and bake the ideas.
Yes, and age the ideas, right? Your comment, like, oh, Darren's gonna go off in the woods, and who knows will come back, right? So one of the things, and I'm very much a 9 on the quick start, so I take action real quick. So one of the things that I've learned to do, and this hopefully will help some of your listeners, is I have a project, I have an idea board. It's a whiteboard of mine, looking right at it over my camera right here. And whenever I come up with a new idea, it's got to sit there for 30 days. And I cannot take action on it. And at the end of the 31st day, am I still as passionate about it as I was when I first wrote it? And I'll tell you, 2/3 of things I'm not, and they come off the board. They go into what I call the someday maybe folder in my Evernote, right? They come off. And I think the worst, one of the worst things a leader can do is like be the chef in the kitchen that shows up and creates chaos and then leaves. So, because what you never want to have happen is, oh, you go to a conference. He's going to a conference or she's going to a conference. I wonder what the idea of the day is going to be when they get back, right? And that just creates a lot of issues. And from we lose our some of our leadership credit, if you will. Are we going to be authentic? Is there going to be follow through? Right? Is it well thought out? So so that 30-day board has been a godsend for me, and for a lot of my clients, quite frankly, we're kind of wired very similarly. You kind of let it age like a good wine or cheese, or I guess even a steak these days. And I'll tell you, you're going to pull a lot of them off and say, yeah, it's a good idea, but it's not a good idea. It's not a good idea for now. So it's not like you're going to put anything up there. It's going to be terrible. But what you're going to find is now's not the time for that. And you'll take it off, and you're going to get a lot of credibility with your team, because when you bring them something, they know it's well thought out. Mm-hmm. They know it's been, sitting there, waiting, baking, aging. And that's really, really important.
Yeah, I think that's such a powerful tip. I hope the viewers really capture that 30-day board. 2/3 end up in I call it the bone pile.
Yeah, I call it someday maybe. Same. But you hit upon something when we're talking about 10X versus 2X and how most leaders play 2X game,
right?
And it's because number one, it's the game they know.
Well, hold up, Joe. So define a 2X game versus a 10X game real quick for the listeners.
Right. Okay, great. Okay, good. So my definition, Sullivan has his and Hardy has his, and I'll give you mine. And I'll explain why I think this is such a cool thing. So to me, 2X is really about you're not really going to shift your identity. You're just going to get better at your identity, your current identity. 10X is when you're willing to when you're going to create a new identity, an elevate identity. So in other words, you're going to leave your past behind. You're going to reinvent yourself, which on the degree of difficulty scale is obviously maybe 10X, right? This is not about taking your firm from 5 million to 50, although it could be. There's nothing wrong with that. But I think a lot of guys get caught up in the math game. And it's really not about that. The math game is the byproduct of the real game. And the real game is creating a new identity, an elevated identity for yourself, and eliminating the 80% of the stuff that you're currently doing that will not be part of the new identity. And that's why the 2X game is easy. You know why? You just have to get better who you currently are. Mm-hmm. The 10X game is, well, who do I need to become? Mm-hmm. That's a very different question, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that's where, and so that to me is how I would define, that's how I am defining it to my clients. Is, hey, we can, and there's nothing wrong, and just so everybody's on the same page here, not throwing any shade at the 2X people. That's totally cool. That's your choice. That's your choice. But if you're like, well, that's not my choice, and I've been hammering on this glass ceiling for a couple of years now, and I can't seem to break through, it is not an operational issue. It is not a marketing issue. You have a you issue, which is have not evolved your identity to make it happen. And the first question of any goal I ever ask anybody, if somebody says 10-year vision, hey, I want to take my firm from 3 million to 15 million. Great. First question out of my mouth. Most people think it's going to be why. That's the second question. First question is, who do you need to become to pull this off? Because the $3 million person in front of me ain't going to do it. But we better figure out who you need to become. And the sooner we get there, the sooner that's going to happen. And that's a very sensitive and uncomfortable conversation with oneself.
It was interesting when I was reading, I just finished reading 10X is Easier than 2X and been kind of cogitating on the concept of identity. And you're right on. I mean, the idea is really upping your identity of who you are. And being that my background, I have my master's in psychology, immediately I'm like, well, what's the difference between this and being a sociopath? And
intent.
That's my psychological brain resistance to it, right?
Yeah.
Because what's so interesting is we all, and typically when you are confronted with the idea of like, Joe, you need to become somebody different than you are today, fundamentally, to pull that off, to do that. Mm-hmm. The mind creates all kinds of resistance points.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Comfort, certainty. Yeah, oh man, 100. And that's the game. See, that's why it's such a big game, because you got to be willing to leave the past version of you behind and create it. But here's the really interesting part. We've all done it before. It's just been done unintentionally. Mm-hmm. You and I could sit here today and, we can go back 10 years and we can look at who we were 10 years ago, and we're not the same person. We're not the same person that we were at 21. So human beings evolve anyway. So this is my kind of epiphany. We're evolving anyway. Like, this is not about change. We're changing. Look, you and I are getting older. We're either getting healthier or we're getting unhealthier. There's like no stasis in this game, right? So my premise is, well, we're going to change anyway. So why not just take control of the thing, do it with intentionality, with focus and vision, right? And I'm not saying it's not work. So there's no easy button in this game. But it's not. I think some people look at 10X, go, man, I can't change. I am who I am. So that's the biggest lie you can ever tell yourself. Here's my evidence. Were you the same person you were 21? No. Then you are different. Mm-hmm. Just be conscious about it. Human beings evolve unconsciously, unintentionally, by inputs, environment, stimuli. We can get into all that. What I'm saying inside this game, the advisor world, leadership world, is choose to evolve consciously, with intention, with the end in mind, and then move towards that. Totally doable.
It's stark how many few people in this world have actually read a book once they got out of school. And that tells you everything about the unintentionality of evolution that most of us embrace. And I think you're dead on. And one of the concepts I always remember is this whole idea, and I don't know the exact science of it, but that our body's basically renewing itself every 70 days or something like that, because our body's made up of water, right? And you can get into the kind of law of attraction stuff and the crystalline structures of water, but at the end of the day, like, that's biological proof that our bodies are fundamentally even different than they were yesterday or the day before.
Yes.
Sure enough, 70 days ago. And so I love that consciously and be intentional about how you're changing. I mean, isn't the ability to consciously change? I mean, that's the essence of, in my mind, a well-lived life, right? That you've harnessed the ability, however long you get on this earth, and when your number gets pulled, it gets pulled, but you can consciously say that I'm progressing towards being that something that I think is more fulfilling in life. However you define that.
I think it's about being your best. Now, in our game, it doesn't mean you need to hit the Barron's list or anything like that. And just know that you're always moving towards something. And my belief is you evolve to the day you die. Somebody asked me, Joe, when do you reach the summit? I said, you never reach the summit, because you know why? There's a box there with your name on it. You don't want to be in the box. So you always want to be climbing the mountain. There's always the next goal. There's always the next vision. It's not about making more money, although it could be. It's about the next challenge, the next thing. And to put it in a leadership context, because I know that's what we're here to talk about. So if this is good for the person that's sitting in the captain's chair, what would happen to the organization if we adopted that across the board? where we took every one of our key players and said, okay, this is the current version of you. I want to take my business from 3 to 15. Who does this person need to become to help me pull this off? Who does this person need to come to pull me off? Who does this person need to come pull me off? And all of a sudden now, culturally, we have something very unique and very dynamic where we have really a culture of personal development. We have culture of ascension and a culture of evolution. That's probably one of the most powerful cultural combinations an organization can have inside of this game that we play in Advisorland.
So say those three things again, Joe, because I think they're great. Culture of evolution,
ascension, evolution, right? And taking this to the next level. I mean, I think that's what it really boils down to, those three things. Like if you can get everybody to say, okay, the current version of me is good. It's good in the chair I'm in today, but it probably will not be good enough in the chair of tomorrow. Then what do I need to do, right? And that's why we always talk about, I've talked about this, investing in our people, making sure they're doing some sort of personal professional development, right? Making them more valuable to the organization and stuff like that. There are so many firms that don't do that because either they don't think about it or they think of it as a COST, right? When it's really not, and so on. So I think that to me is really a fundamental thing of leadership is not just about you evolving. I mean, because if you evolve and your team doesn't, guess what? You get frustrated because you're on this journey and they're not, right? And then we get the gap. And that's where the stress comes. So in other words, you have to, as a leader, inspire. You can't motivate them. That's temporary. You got to inspire them as part of the culture, right? Part of the culture has to be there. Like, hey, we're always going to be getting better. It's never, not that it's not good enough. It's good enough for today. It just won't be good enough for tomorrow.
well,
And I think that's not a negative,
right? It's like, do you focus on the gap? And this is another book of Sullivan's, but the gap of the game, right?
Yeah. I think the gap, I think you always look at your gains because that gives you confidence. It gives you competence. And looking at the gap is interesting. If you look at it from I got this gap, I'm not good enough, I haven't achieved, then it's not a good place to play, right? But you look at it and say, here's the challenge. I've got this gap, but I'm going to look at it as a challenge, whether it's a personal challenge or an organizational challenge. And I'm going to go attack this thing because I know that we can solve it or I can solve it. Then that's okay because the frame is on it, right? The positive frame's on it. But if it's like, and I see this all the time, our world is kind of warped. And here's what I mean by that. I remember at this conference, probably 15, 18 years ago, I spoke at a conference, broker-dealer conference. And I served my clients there. And so I was going to go, and so we're all standing in line waiting for dinner or something like that. And I remember it was my client who said, he goes, Joe, have you ever been in a room of so many people that make $250,000 a year and they feel like they're absolute failures? And I just thought that was profound because it's so true. Our game here, the guys, and again, advisors, we look at the data points and stuff like that. But bottom line is, we're pretty well compensated in this game. And yet we never feel like we're successful enough. Why? Because we didn't make top 10 this, or we didn't get under 40 this, or we didn't end up on the Barron's. So in other words, advisors, by and large, as an organization, as an institution, are trained to live in the gap. Why? Because when you're brought into this business, what happens in your first couple of years? You're ranked. You're ranked by your training class. You're ranked by the firm, right? And it's never good enough, right? Never good enough. And so our industry messes with people because we create a gap-oriented mindset. But yet, to really ascend, you have to live in the game. And this was one of the most fascinating, and this is like recent for me. I don't think you and I ever even talked about this yet. It was my epiphany moment where I was just sitting there going, because I was talking to, I run a group for young advisors, right? So I kind of that's one of my passion projects. And it floored me how firms, and they still do it to this day, by the way, they take a little edge off it, but it's still there. You always measure versus your class, or measure versus this, or measure versus that. And so you can have, hey, I grew by 25% this year, and by all stretch, that's really good. Yeah, but you were in the top 10, so gap. All right. And I'm not saying we should coddle our people, but we have to acknowledge their gains. And human beings don't acknowledge their gains in a normal, ordinary life. It's even worse so here. So one of the things that I do, whether it's one of our groups or personal work, if the agenda gets filled out, is, hey, tell me about your gains since the last meeting. Like, I want everybody to live in the game because you got to know that you're making a difference, you're evolving, you're getting better at what you do. But nobody sits, I challenged one of my clients to do this a couple months ago. I said, I want you to go back 5 years. I want you to pull up your P&L from that 5 years. 5 years ago, pull up your P&L. And then I want you to pull up the P&L from last year. And he did. I said, what do you know? So he goes, I grew my business by 300%. So then then I said, why do you think you're a failure then? Well, because I want that.
Then grow by 500, Joe.
Yeah, right. But so there's a gap, right? Not good enough, right? But
Right.
see, and so this is the interesting game. I've given us a lot of thoughts. You're catching me at a really good time to have these conversations. I think and I could be guilty of this too a little bit, putting too much credibility or credence on short-term growth. And if you think about it, my philosophy is, hey, this is a great game, never retire. Why, right? In that regard. So why are we so stressed all the time of hitting these big growth numbers? And I had somebody do this as an example, and it's like a $4 million firm. I said, I want you to put 5% on your top line every year for the next 10 years and compound it. Then I want you to put 10% on it and compound it. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but it's pretty large growth. I said, I'm going to give you two choices. The 10% we can do. It's going to be a lot of work. You're not going to have a lot of balance. It's going to be really stressful, right? And we're going to have to really push it, but it's doable. Or we can grow at 5% and it's going to be enjoyable, sustainable, more fun. Which one do you want, right? And it's interesting when you frame it in a certain way, like, hey, we can do both, but here's the check for this one, the price, and here's the check for this one, the price. 90% of people not take this one because they'll take this one. You know why? Because at the end of the day, it's still a lot of money. It still is. You're still going to be where you need to be. And maybe I'm getting older in my world here, and I've been doing this for 30 years now, and I plan to do it for at least another 30. Whether I die with X amount of net worth or Y amount of net worth, I'm still dead. So I better make sure I damn well enjoy the journey. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of leaders don't take that into their consideration. And not that we want to have a culture of just good enough. It's not about that. It's about understanding that, okay, if you grow your game, are you going to enjoy the process of the game? Not saying it's not going to be hard work. Not saying there's not going to be failures. Not saying there won't be adversity. But are you going to enjoy it? Like people like doing Tough Mudder contest, right? Mm-hmm. They enjoy the pain, the suffering, the mud, the dirt, right? It's part of the experience, right? They enjoy it. And there's a sense of the struggle, and there's a sense of accomplishment after that. Well, same thing here. There's no free lunch, but you just got to make sure you're enjoying that journey. Otherwise, you're going to check out on it throughout your career. Maybe I do something else. Maybe I should sell this thing. And when a leader does that, whether they want to admit it or not, they start disengaging from their people because they're not sure, they're not growing anymore with it. And that's a big issue and I think the more we hear about M&A and buyouts and they're all good stuff, by the way, I'm no qualms on that. But if you're going to do something, make sure you're doing it for the right reason and not just check grabbing, because once you're out, man, it's hard to get back in. It really, really is.
It's amazing, Joe. I had a difficult experience this year and losing both my dad and my brother. And I think back on their lives, and I've got a 25 by 10 foot storage facility with everything they owned in it. And you think about that and just what a sobering thought. And I think your point's well taken. It's like, if you're not in love with the journey, if you don't have joy in the journey, you never arrive. So if you think you're going to get that joy and that satisfaction when you arrive, you're mistaken. And at the end of the day, whether you believe in heaven or whatever form of future afterlife that you subscribe to, the only thing left in this earth is a storage room full of garbage and some things for people to have good memories. So create good memories and enjoy the journey. And I think leaders who help their people find the joy in the journey thrive above those who don't, because I think that's really the ticket at the end of the day to all this, whether you're mowing lawns for a living or being a financial advisor, it doesn't matter. Do you enjoy the journey?
Amen, brother. Amen to that.
Well, Joe, this has been great. I really appreciate you taking the time to jump in with us today and share a little bit about your journey and Before we close out, if you had to give a new advisor, a new leader, one thing that they would take out of this thing that you said, of all the advisors you've helped be successful in their leadership, what is that distinguishing factor? It's a loaded question, Joe, but
no, it's actually three things. Number one, what do you spend the first hour of the morning on? So how do you start your day? Number two, what's your 10-year vision? Number three, how much are you reinvesting back in you to make you the best version of you? There's three things, right? How you start your day, what is the grand vision for the next 10 years? And then how much are you investing back in you to make you a better version of you? Three things.
Joe, you taught me that last one, and I didn't believe it at first, which was invest 10% of your revenue back in yourself. And I've done that over the last, I guess, 3 years now. And wow, it's made a huge difference. And the groups of people I've associated with, and it's hard to make that commitment, but I can attest to what you're saying here. That's definitely true. Joe, thanks for joining us, and look forward to seeing you in a few weeks.
Yeah, Darren, thanks for having me, man. This was great. I can't believe the time flew, but yeah, it was fun.
Take your next step in leadership. Go to leadyourfirm.com for more practical lessons in leadership for RIAs. Find the book, Clarity, at leadyourfirm.com and Amazon. Subscribe now to catch future episodes of the Lead Your Firm podcast. This podcast is a production of Fermata Advisors, LLC, an SEC-registered investment advisor, headquartered in Sonoma, California. Contents are for information purposes only. Nothing herein amounts to investment advice or an offer to buy or sell securities. Fermata Advisors does not provide tax or legal advice. Thank you for listening to the end. True leaders read the fine print. See you next episode.